We're all set.
Right. All right, well, thank you. I'm gonna call to order the March 21, 2025, and first ground active meeting of the Climate and Sustainability Committee of the City of Palo Alto. Would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Burt.
Here.
Councilmember Lou.
Here.
Vice Mayor Dinker.
Here,
All present.
thank you. Do we have any public comment? Either in the room or online. Let's start with in the room. Looks like maybe for,
Sir, if you'd like to speak, you can take a seat right here.
welcome.
Give me one moment.
Well, thank you for this opportunity to speak. My name is David Cole, and in looking at the FCAP plan, there's a call for increase from 19% to 40% of bike head mode share in the next 5 years. And I'm interested to know what this committee, what the city is doing to realize that plan. When I look at the last bike head plan, there was a span of almost 12 years now, because it's been late being updated. Almost nothing has happened in the last 7 years, with the exception of the Charleston Corridor Rastadero project. The last plan was only 30% implemented. So that tells me if we're relying on transportation bike ped plan to make up this difference, it's not going to happen. So there needs to be more attention paid to bike ped infrastructure if we're going to meet the goals in the SCAP. So that's my concern.
Thank you for your comment. Do you have any others?
No, that concludes public comment.
All right, thank you. Okay, so we'll move to a section of the agenda that frankly was inspired by my colleague, Councilmember Burt, and the Rail Committee, called Standing Verbal Reports, because we're blessed with people who have direct connections to a lot of regional agencies. And now that we, we've long had a leadership role in the climate area, thanks to Councilmember Burt and our community members and others who have really led the way. The greenhouse gases and floodwaters don't know municipal boundaries. So I think it makes sense to hear from the other, any updates from other agencies that impact that. So whether it's MTC or NCPA or BACMID or BTA or whatever others, if there are things that are relevant for this committee to know about as we triangulate our policy, this is the time. But first, we will start with staff comments.
Sure, and I think just some introductory comments from staff that I'll make. I'm Brad Eggleston, the Director of Public Works. We'd like to welcome everyone here to this first meeting of the new Climate Action and Sustainability Committee. Our committee members are Vice Mayor Vicki Vinker as Chair, Councilmember Pat Burt, and Councilmember George Liu, all here with us today. And really just wanted to note this committee is continuing work that's been done by council ad hoc committees addressing climate change and sustainability and beginning in 2021. And as we've now firmly progressed into implementation of the SCAP, this committee, as the chair mentioned, will now follow Brown Act procedures, which will mean there'll be a regular schedule of public meetings and agendas and materials published in advance. So this is our first meeting. It's a special meeting at a different time. But in general, the meetings for the committee will be held the first Friday of each month at 1:30 p.m. We have two important topics to go over, discuss with the committee today. And then I'll note that the agenda for the next meeting, the next regular meeting, which is on April 4th at 1:30 p.m., was just published yesterday. So at that meeting, we'll be talking about the preliminary findings of the SCAP funding study. And so just as we kick off, wanted to note that Our staff team is really looking forward to engaging with the committee, ongoing engagement with our working group members, and the public as we work towards the city's 80 by 30 greenhouse gas goal. And really the many climate and sustainability related council priority objectives that city council has just tentatively approved in the last couple of weeks, that we'll be tackling throughout the year.
Wonderful, thank you. And with that, we'll move on to committee member comments and announcements. So, Pat, do you have things to share?
Yeah, I can share that at the recent MTC meeting on the subject, MTC worked on its legislative agenda for the year, and a primary focus is the renewal of the cap and trade dollars. Specifically, their recommendations are that there be a greater focus in the utilization of those dollars to supporting operations of transit agencies in this region, because the shift from really not needing operating subsidies to post-COVID, these agencies must have operating subsidies if they're going to continue at their current level of service, what's more, improved service. And then second, advocating that a greater portion of the 25% of the cap and trade dollars that currently go to high-speed rail be allocated to the projects in the bookends of that system, meaning the LA metropolitan area and the Bay Area metropolitan area. And for us, that's primarily along the Caltrain corridor, to arguably have that corridor more prepared for high-speed rail if it should ever come, but to have more practical impacts at this point in time. And so those were adopted as directions that MTC is going to take. And then just following up on David Cole's comments on the relationship between the Bike and Ped Master Plan, or Bike and Ped Transportation Plan that we're working on, and our climate plan. I think that's an important point, and that we have not reconciled. And I want to make sure everybody knows that we have a public meeting on the Bike and Ped community outreach meeting on that on April 2nd at 6 o'clock at Mitchell. That's it.
Thank you. George, do you have anything? No, okay. I just want to give a couple of updates. One from the Bay Area Air District. At our meeting just a couple days ago, Policy Grants and Technology Committee meeting, we received an update on the Bay Area Regional Climate Action Plan. And I think what's interesting to note for us here in Palo Alto is that the Air District is the lead agency on that plan. It's $1 million grant that got a couple of years ago from EPA for all the counties around the Bay Area except Santa Clara County. So what's interesting is the report is on, how they're going to work together and integrate the climate action regionally. But don't worry, Santa Clara County got its own grant, also of $1 million, to do its own climate action plan. And so I asked that next time they provide us with a more integrated report, because obviously greenhouse gases don't know county borders either. So, so that is ongoing, and wanted people to be aware of that, and aware that if you see a Santa Clara County plan, there's actually a broader regional plan. And I was assured the two leaders are in communication on that. We also went through similarly a review of a lot of bills active in our state capitol. And I won't go through them except to mention there is one where there is a tension, a perceived tension in prescribed burns that we do to avoid out of control fires. And there's a concern over whether that should continue to have Air District public health involvement, and so there's a discussion about how to monitor those and permit those. And clearly that's something that's top of mind for a lot of people. So that's going to be an ongoing concern. Then I wanted just to mention for how we, since we have a couple of electrification things on our agenda today, how we get that power to electrify through the Northern California Power Agency. I got an update from staff. I want to share just a couple of quick things. There is integrated planning going on with NCPA on an interagency resource plan that gets updated every 2 years for renewable procurement needs, transmission planning, and interconnection of new resources. Also wanted to report that Palo Alto is on track to meet California's RPS, renewable portfolio standards that are going to increase in 27 and 2030. And we can be proud that of all 13 NCPA member agencies, Palo Alto has the lowest carbon footprint. So that's good news. And like the Air District, NCPA is also highly cognizant of wildfire risks. There's a utilities wildfire mitigation plan, 2025 update that's going to incorporate the newly published state fire marshals severity zone maps. We talked about those Monday at council. Those just came out for the northern part of the state. And so they're going to adapt to those as well. So that is my report from those two agencies.
Follow-up question.
Yeah.
As the Air District is looking at the air quality impacts of controlled burns, do they have a methodology that they're using to compare the risks from the controlled burns versus uncontrolled burns, that mega fires that could result from not doing that? Or comparative risk analysis.
So our role is simply to work on the timing of when they have the least health impact on neighboring cities and communities. So there are others that look at when, where, how the prescribed burn should happen. And so this question was only, do we leave that solely to local authorities, or do we keep some public health aspect to say, hey, the weather is not conducive to it that day, et cetera, et cetera. So,
Understood. Thanks.
yeah, thanks. Anything more on that? All right, so let's move to our first action item. Number 1, recommendation to council to direct staff to develop an affordable multi-family housing electrification grant program and to approve a budget amendment in the gas utility funds. And I will turn to whom?
All right, I'll jump right in.
Mr. Abendschein. All right, thank you.
Jonathan Abendschein, Assistant Director for Climate Action, and I'll be presenting this item today, but I wanted to just call out that we have Rachel DeFranco here on the call, who is leading and is responsible for this program. We were a little unsure about whether Rachel will be able to make it, and I'm really glad that she is. But I'm taking the presentation and she'll be available to answer any questions about the program as we're thinking about it. So this program is focused on affordable multifamily housing electrification. It's a grant program proposal that is coming out of a study we did last fall. And if I could get the next slide, let me just talk about that for a minute. So I think as we've been going through our SCAP development and working through the programs over the last few years, we've been really aware of the fact that affordable housing and multifamily housing emissions reductions are both really challenging areas, but also really important areas to focus on, in particular because of the equity dimensions to it. Before we adopted the SCAP, we actually did a small multifamily building electrification pilot, and that really demonstrated to us that we needed to study multifamily a lot more. So for actual work in the 2023 through 2025 work plan, the work items really focus more heavily on EV charging in multifamily, which we had a lot more familiarity with. But we also said we wanted to do some more studies and design a pilot in the 2023 through 2025 time period. So we've been continuing to talk with affordable housing owners and other multifamily building owners. And in the last year, we started working on, and now we've nearly completed a study of multifamily building electrification. Really, all we're doing at this point is finalizing the report. And I just want to note that at the same time as we're thinking through our own focuses on multifamily building electrification, the Air District also has the regulations that are coming into effect starting in 2029 that will start to affect multifamily and affordable housing. And then in 2031, commercial scale gas water heaters start to be impacted. And in most multifamily buildings, we're seeing individual space heating and centralized water heating. So that's not universal necessarily. So that's why I'm calling out those specific regulations. Next slide, please. So as part of that multifamily study I mentioned, we had an engineering consultant actually visit several multifamily buildings and several multifamily affordable housing sites. I think it was 5 sites with 3 different providers. And we found a lot of gas equipment nearing end of life in those surveys. We hadn't necessarily expected that it was going to be quite as extensive and universal as we ran into, but everyone we surveyed had something that was close to end of life. But there was a lot of interest in electrifying those systems. This is something that's on our providers' radars. They're really interested in making sure that the more vulnerable population that they're serving is brought along with any efforts on electrification. And so at the same time as we're noting these all this gas equipment that's nearing end of life, we're also seeing a number of potential state funding opportunities for affordable electrification. And at the time, so this got on our radar last December, and at the time we were thinking there are also these federal funding opportunities that we were concerned would go away. At this point, we're not really considering the federal opportunities viable unless something changes, but the state programs are still available. The YWIP program is still active, and there's more funding for tech multifamily incentives under consideration from what we hear. Next slide, please. When we were talking with these providers, we also heard that they had capital constraints, and if we wanted to make these projects happen on the short timeline that we thought was necessary to take advantage of funding, they would need some kind of a local match. I think when we were doing the study, we really hoped to have a little bit more time to develop pilots at a little bit more of a slower pace. But what we were seeing here is that the amount of equipment we're talking about nearing end of life it serves over 400 units, or about 25% of our affordable housing stock. And so we wanted to give council the opportunity to set up a program and make sure that this equipment doesn't end up being gas, which in that case, we would lose the opportunity to electrify it for as much as 20 years or more. So this is the basic design we're proposing. It's grants up to the amounts that are listed on this slide. The expectation is that these providers are applying for every grant opportunity that is available to them, and city funds are only meant to fund the remainder. With a program designed like this, it should allow for electrification of all the equipment we are aware of, and also could allow for an additional project or two in case there are housing providers out there who didn't participate in our study. And we know there are several who didn't participate, but who might also have aging equipment that needs a replacement. Next slide, please. So just putting this program in the context of our overall SCAP strategy, at a high level, we've had this sort of 3-part strategy, which is, to learn from early pilots and studies, then to develop advanced pilots to serve early adopters. That's, really that first 5% to 10% of potential adopters within the city who are interested in electrification, but who you need to make it easy for them. And then finally, to start scaling that up to the entire population, to the majority of Palo Altans. And this grant program really fits into the second part of that strategy, the early adopter advanced pilots. The reason we want to do these advanced pilots is to gather data that helps us, figure out how to scale the programs up to the entire community. To learn how to communicate and convince people of the value of electrification, to build that critical mass of early adopters that can provide an example to others, help us smooth out permitting processes, figure out how to design the program financial structures efficiently, and then also figure out how to really effectively engage the contractors who will actually do the retrofits. We're also finding that these advanced pilots help the air district develop its mandates, and we also participate along with the rest of the region in transforming the market ahead of those mandates taking effect. And then, of course, they also help the gas utility and electric utility learn about the impacts of electrified homes. And this grant program is going to help us accomplish all those goals. We're going to learn a lot about electrifying multifamily if we go forward with this. We'll learn about the challenges owners of properties serving low-income residents face. We'll learn about the electric system requirements and how to deal with multifamily gas service retirements. Low-income multifamily is going to be a particularly tricky topic for the air district, so I think this will provide some data to support their work. And then we also this also allows us, with moving quickly like this enables to take advantage of existing and upcoming state grant programs for low income solar, because the site electric use will be higher, so we may even be able to take greater advantage of those funds if those providers end up applying for those solar programs. Next slide, please. All right, so we're proposing to fund this program from the gas cap and trade reserves, and our prior direction from council on this funding source has been to prioritize greenhouse gas emissions reductions. We have a policy, but these funds can also be used for climate credits to reduce gas rates. We want to just make sure to note that trade-off today. We don't want to discuss the use of these revenues or other revenue sources more broadly at this meeting. That's a policy discussion that we're likely to have a little later in the spring, but we wanted you to have this information for awareness. And, even if used for climate action, these programs do trade off against other climate programs. And so just so you know how we're striking that balance, we've been using the 2023 through 2025 SCAP work plan and the council priorities to really try to make sure we're deploying enough money to be able to deploying a balanced amount of money to be able to achieve all those different objectives. And then next slide, please. All right, so if the budget or the trade-off is a little bit too much for the committee right now, we are talking about a few alternatives that could reduce the upfront budget need. So there are three overall themes. One is starting small and asking for more money if needed later. The second is focusing only on central equipment, which costs less or has a lower level of grant need. And then require a provider contribution to make sure the city's only paying the incremental costs instead of the whole cost of this equipment. As far as trade-offs go, if we start small, that's of the three themes, that's the easiest one for us to implement. It may mean some projects get delayed, but there's always the opportunity to get additional funding if needed, or for the council to devote additional funding if needed. And the delays do mean there's some possibility that some of these projects, if there's not enough money for all of them in the first tranche, that some of these projects may not be able to access some of that funding and so may or may not go forward. Central equipment, on the other hand, that reduces the cost budget really significantly. If you focus only on central equipment, it does prevent us from getting more experience with in-unit equipment, and that's the sort of equipment that has the most benefit directly to low-income residents. Both in terms of on-bill savings and in terms of extreme heat protection, because it does add air conditioning. Requiring provider contribution also reduces the budget need, but if the providers haven't accumulated the capital they need to do the replacement yet, they may not end up moving forward. And a lot of these projects do have a lot of additional remediation costs that can bring the costs up. And so they may end up delaying, missing out on those funding opportunities, and so it may cost more to electrify them later. This last theme, the provider contribution, we could mitigate that issue, the capital availability issue with some kind of a loan program if we wanted to. It would need to be 0% on bill and without collateral for it to really work for them. But the thing about that is if we end up doing a loan program, we'll need the money to loan, so then we'll end up needing the full budget or at least most of the budget anyway. It just means the money will come back to us eventually. So even, yeah, so that's the trade-off there. Next slide, please. This chart, which was also in the report, shows the different sort of permutations of those three different themes and the budget that it results in. And I'm happy to speak to any of these specifically. I'm not going to talk through every one of them. And then last slide, please. This is the staff recommendation. We're recommending that you recommend to City Council approval of the staff proposal with the 6.6 million budget amendment from gas cap and trade. That's what I have. Thank you.
And if I could add one thing, so if you look at your staff report in the fiscal resource impact section, it talks about the finance committee considering potential uses of the funding. That relates to what Jonathan was talking about, how this gas cap and trade funding could be used for various things. Since this report was published, we've been continuing to discuss that. And the current plan is actually to bring this topic to the full council in April sometime before we actually have the finance committee budget hearings. So just wanted to note that correction because that's different from what the staff report said.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Abenshine, for that presentation. Do we have any public comment on this item?
None for item 1.
Okay, great. All right, well, bring it back to my colleagues. Have any comments, George?
I have some questions.
Questions? Sure.
Thank you. Just for my own intuition, do we have a sense of the kind of ROI in terms of greenhouse gas reductions per dollar for central versus in unit? And also how this might compare to other programs like the second item we're going to look at today?
You mean on the metric of cost effectiveness?
Yeah.
So these affordable housing grants, so they range pretty significantly depending on the individual project. Some of the projects are more are better set up to be able to accommodate a heat pump water heater, for example, a central heat pump water heater, and so the costs are lower. In other places, there's a lot of extra building modifications that need to be made. So the cost ranges pretty dramatically. In the SCAP funding study we've been doing, in-unit space heating. So the biggest cost is really around in-unit space heating and central water heating. There's also, there are also some potential like cooktop installations that they might consider, but it's really the space and the water heating. And the in-unit space heating and the gas water heating is on the more expensive side of all of the different potential emissions reduction opportunities that we have in Palo Alto. And that's the challenge of working with multifamily. If we want to actually be able to achieve the 80% reduction goal, it's really sort of an all hands on deck, and these are a little bit more on the expensive side.
Okay, and the state grants would cover both the in-unit and the central. And so I would have expected that the ROI for this program would be relatively good in the sense that the state could pay for a significant contribution. Do you have a sense of, like, for a typical project, what % of the funding would be from the state and what would be from the city? Just to give context on the ROI, but also what a potential provider contribution could be.
Yeah, and so there's a little bit of a difference between the ROI and the ROI on Palo Alto specific investment.
Right.
So yeah, I see where you're coming to. And so for some of these projects, the investment is actually really small, and for others, it's fairly large. Rachel, do you have um, just a high level ballpark that you can share on percentages? If not, I think I can pull out what I can remember. You're on mute, by the way.
Yeah, the low income weatherization program funding, which is coming out of the California Climate Investments Fund, can cover kind of a range of the project costs. It's based off of the emissions reductions of a project. So we don't have each of these projects fully scoped, but we did have, kind of some ballpark figures from our assessment that Wildan did as part of our building sector study. So based on that, the assumptions for LIWIP funding came in at, somewhere between maybe a quarter to half of the project costs on average, but it does vary depending on the type of measures that are involved in the project, and also we're making some assumptions about the project costs and also the LIWIP funding because the projects haven't been fully scoped yet.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, still hard to form a super clear intuition about that, but it's useful to know that the state's contribution would be in the 25% to 50 range. And so there's still a pretty significant gap to close. So so that doesn't necessarily mean we have a super strong ROI from the city of Palo Alto perspective, though it definitely helps a lot. Also, one clarification question. The staff report talked about affordable units in the context of inclusionary zoning and other market rate projects that have some portion of affordable units. Presumably nothing here would apply to those units, and none of the in-unit programs could apply to those units either.
Rachel, you want to speak to that? Because I don't think that we've ruled that out actually as a possibility.
So you're talking about the applicability of the funding to cover units that would not necessarily be affordable? Is that the question?
No,
so-
like below market rate units.
Below market rate.
Market rate units in market rate housing,
Yeah.
right? Is what you were
Oh.
getting.
Inclusionary housing.
Yeah.
Right. So the LIWIP and also the design for the HERA funding, which was the federal funds that have been frozen, designate eligibility on the basis of deed restricted affordable housing or a percentage of units that fall within a specific income threshold. And I'm trying to remember offhand, I think it was like about 2/3 of the units had to be within may have been the 50% AMI. I'd have to go back to the notes, but so there could be some properties that have mostly affordable units that are Section 8 housing or below market rate that would also qualify. It's really based on the percentage of total units that fall within certain income thresholds, and we want to make sure that we're able to leverage those state funding sources to be able to make our incentive dollars go as far as possible. So we would be following the same requirements as the LIWIP program. Is that helpful?
Yes, I was imagining a hypothetical case where maybe I live in a deed restricted affordable unit, pay that's 80% or 60% of income, and I want to put up $3,000 and hope the city can put up another $3,000 to get me a nice in-unit electric heating system or something like that.
Keep on.
I will say that that's not included in this program design, but we are also currently looking at our REAP program, which serves low income households, and exploring ways that we could support renters in how we refresh that program. So it hasn't been fully baked yet, but we definitely the challenge in multifamily is that there is this combination of central systems and then in-unit systems. So we have come across a number of renters or even owners of properties that are in multifamily that are interested in doing an in-unit measure, and the way that our program's designed currently don't serve them very well. So it is an area that we want to serve, and we're actively looking to figure out ways to serve. But for this specific program design, we're really looking at working with the property management company and doing the units either, or doing the measures either in unit or central through that larger property management.
Right, thank you. That totally makes sense. I just want to confirm if that would hypothetically be in scope.
Mhm.
Now or in the future for this program, and it sounds like it's potentially a future program down the line. I have maybe a couple other questions and comments, but I'll hold off and pass it back.
Go ahead.
No, I need a minute to formulate. Yeah.
So first, let me follow up on George's question. I took him to be referring to that we have within, we've had an inclusionary housing zoning ordinance for a long while. And those are typically 15% of the units in market rate developments are required to be inclusionary. Those are, I think, all citywide, all managed through Alta Housing. And so what I thought the question was about was whether those units would qualify in this program under the in-unit category. So there are projects that are 100% deed restricted affordable, and then there are these percentages that are scattered throughout and many hundreds of them in our community. So do we, and maybe that's something we simply haven't looked at yet, but I'm trying to understand why those shouldn't qualify for the in-unit, especially if we have a partner agency that's managing those on our behalf.
Yeah, and Rachel, what I heard from you was that it goes down to the definition of inclusionary housing that the state's using for delivery of its grant funds. Did I capture that correctly?
Correct. Yeah. So it's really about that property in its entirety, and then having a percentage of units that are below market rate within that property, and that percentage needs to be above a certain threshold, which is 2/3, in order for that property to qualify for the funding under LIWIP, which is a multifamily program. So for those those units that are below market rate in a complex that is market rate, we would need to design a program that serves them as a single family unit in a way. It'd be, or, an in-unit in a multifamily complex, but just working directly with that unit rather than with the property management.
Okay. Yeah, I was assuming the central space wouldn't apply to those projects, but was thinking that the in-unit would. Okay.
That's what she said.
And then I just want to make sure, so these cap and trade dollars flow directly to the gas utility, correct?
That's correct.
And then under the Title 17 regulations, we have the staff report lists 4 bullets of kind of qualifying uses. And so what's our argument that this is, which of those does this qualify under?
Sorry, hold on. Let me get the exact wording. Yeah, it's greenhouse gas emissions reducing activities. And
That just broad enough that
it not only is, but yeah, it is. And in fact, on the next page, you'll see that council actually thought really hard about this. Both in 2015, when we were a little unsure whether this fell under greenhouse gas reducing activities, and then more recently in 2022, when we'd come to the conclusion that yes, absolutely they did. CARB staff also agreed with that. And specifically in our guidance, council's guidance, they said fuel switching from natural gas to electricity and reduces greenhouse gas emissions is a valid use of these funds. So that's
I remember we had made that argument. I'm glad to have that confirmation. Or agree with it. And is the anticipation that we'd be retiring the hookups related to this?
It really depends on the project.
Okay.
So there's an opportunity potentially, but we'll have to see project by project.
And when we electrify these systems, these projects, I didn't notice anything about what might be increased electric demand, either to the project itself, their panels, their feeds, and secondarily, how it fits with our grid mod, which I assume we be is staying current with that, but
Yeah, so this is an interesting topic that is another reason that this grant program is going to be helpful, because it helps us understand the challenges with the grid, any grid upgrades associated with these multifamily buildings. The grid modernization project is addressing transformers that serve multiple buildings. But a lot of times these buildings have their own transformer. They're more like a commercial property. So as the grid is upgraded around these properties, there will be adequate feeder capacity and substation capacity. Other equipment will be up to scale, but the individual transformer for an individual building it requires such a specific analysis that those aren't mass upgraded as part of the grid modernization project. So we're going to need a solution for that. And part of this program will help us figure that out.
okay, so we don't quite know the answer yet.
We don't have an established citywide policy on how to deal with those, but in this program, I think we're assuming that utility upgrades would be part of the grants if needed.
And probably this applies to a
And
lesser.
Rachel will tell me if I'm saying anything wrong. And Rachel, please feel free to jump in. You got your hands up there.
Yeah, I'll just add that we have been trying to figure out solutions to this question in our multifamily EV program, and we've been working with a few affordable housing providers to install EV charging, where main panel upgrades and transformer upgrades have come into question. And so as we're looking at EV charging installations, if there are electric service upgrades necessary, we also want to be factoring in the load that building electrification will bring, so that when we support those service upgrades, we're doing it right from the start, rather than having to go back and upgrade again a few years down the line when building electrification happens. So this is going to actually give us a very significant opportunity to work with these affordable housing providers to come up with the right load calculation, so that, you know, if they are having to do a service upgrade with these projects, which is pretty likely, not only will our incentives, you know, help to cover that because we're covering a good portion of the upfront costs for these facilities, but then also we'll be able to look at building electrification load and EV charging load, whether they've put in EV chargers already or they're considering that for the future, to make sure that we're right sizing from the beginning.
Well, and on that right sizing theme, we have the right sizing of appliances, which probably are less of an issue here than in single family, where folks tend to oversize a lot. But that kind of lower watt approach, along with the smarter systems. And are we, you know, you alluded to on the EV charging, and I know that we're now starting to see kind of shared smart charging arrays, or I don't know what's the best way to put it, like the Go Power EV and things like that, where we don't have the amount of increase in panel size that would otherwise be the case. And are we, is part of this program also looking at those smart systems and integrating that so that we don't necessarily trigger the on-site transformer or otherwise?
My goal is to make sure that whenever we're putting in EV charging and building electrification systems, that we're evaluating load management strategies to the greatest extent possible and incorporating them in, which does add an additional cost, which is another reason why our incentive is so important. And so, you know, that way we are ensuring that we aren't oversizing our systems either and potentially causing you know, a challenge at the transformer level or beyond. And EV load management is something that we're looking at. We've been encouraging it heavily, and we're looking at, whether it makes sense to actually require it in EV program 2.0 design as well, which we'll come talk to you about at a future date. But, as we're thinking about these building electrification systems and affordable housing, load management, is going to be key in all of this.
Great. Last question. I think you maybe alluded to, but is induction cooking part of this appliance upgrade? It's not a major portion of the gas consumption, but I just want to make sure it's included, and that once again, as we are encouraging participation, that the health aspects, that we're really including a deliberate educational component to this, which spurs participation by the residents in these units as well as the nonprofits.
Yes, so the in-unit measure option for what we're proposing would include electrification of all equipment. So it wouldn't just be the space heating, the water heating. It would include cooking appliances, laundry facilities, anything that is a gas end use.
Great. And I guess one final thing that is looking a little over the horizon, but we're beginning our work on looking at the scenarios on retiring gas distribution, or at least scaling that. Given the size of some of these projects, does that start integrating with being able to trim branches off of the tree and have any significant impact on that we would be able to gradually reduce our gas distribution feeder system as a result of these?
Yep, so there's nothing about these projects that has jumped out as particularly lending themselves to that activity. But if we see opportunities, like certainly we're going to learn something from these projects with respect to gas retirement. And if we see opportunities like that for retirement of an entire segment, I'm sure we would take advantage of that if it were feasible.
And I apologize, I meant to ask the process question. Brad, you said that this would go to the council ahead of going to the finance committee, and why was that?
Well, it's not actually this particular program recommendation. The way we framed this up is that if we get this committee's unanimous recommendation, we would plan to bring approval of this program to the council on consent. What we were referring to is that in the context of the budget process this year, as we're starting to look at some of these larger scale pilot programs that actually have a more significant cost than what we've been doing, and we're looking at significant rate increases, the city's overall budget situation that we're facing, we want to have kind of a bigger picture discussion with the full council about the trade-offs of priorities and the different ways of spending this funding before we actually ask the council to make that commitment.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'll ask a couple of things before we go back to George. And first, just an observation, it sounds like we need to talk to our state legislators about including those PMR units in the same provision as affordable projects have for the in-unit upgrade to electric. So question, just to clarify, so in the staff report, the report from the Wildem study is that the providers, as you mentioned, are really ready or are eager to electrify. It says providing a unique opportunity to electrify equipment serving about 20% of the dedicated affordable units in Palo Alto. Is that because that's the size of the pilot, or is that because it would be limited to those sites that were surveyed?
We don't. This program's size to be able to serve maybe a little bit more than the projects that were surveyed. The projects themselves are about 20% of all inclusionary housing, and that includes both deed restricted, it's all deed restricted properties, including ones that are not in in fully inclusionary developments that are in market rate developments. So when I say that percentage, I'm sorry, I'm creating confusion here. So that percentage is based off our entire inclusionary population, but this program would only apply, of course, to those that the LIWIP program standards would include.
Right. I guess what I was trying to get at is, are we offering this to any on a first come, first serve? Or are you focusing on those you surveyed?
It's offered to any on a first come,
Okay.
first serve. We just think those are the most likely. to
I
join.
see, I
Yeah.
see.
Can I follow on there just for a
Please.
second? That's a good question.
Please.
So Jonathan, and Rachel, with the way we propose to size this then, is that meant to cover all of the projects that we're aware of that fall within the criteria to meet the state grant program?
It's sized to allow for another project or so in addition to those. So the idea being that just because people, just because those folks let our consultant on site to do a site survey, doesn't mean that, they're the only ones who are able to enter the program, essentially.
That's really what I'm getting at, because then I was gonna say, how are those sites chosen and getting into all of that, and so.
I can share that, we did give everybody, we sent out communications to all multifamily property owners that we could find. We did a very, very broad outreach. These are the folks that responded to us.
Okay, thank you. And then I wanted to drill down a little bit on the program alternatives, on slides 7 and 8, and particularly slide 8, where we talk about, potentially a provider contribution. And we know these are, entities we love and that have, budget concerns just like we do. But I guess what I'm wondering is, absent this program and absent electrification, if these appliances are getting to end of life, presumably they have had some plan for maintaining the units, and replacement cost have to be budgeted to some degree. So do we have a sense of what degree that is? And if we could just have them go along status quo, so not zero, but whatever it was they were planning to spend anyway, and then we help with that delta? Is there some sense of that analysis?
Yeah, so I'll turn to Rachel, but what I've heard so far is that in some different providers have different amounts of capital. They're managing an entire portfolio. They're trying to prioritize a whole different range of maintenance issues all at once. And so capital availability for these specific projects is a little bit mixed from what I've heard. But Rachel, why don't you expand on that a little?
Yeah, I mean, what Jonathan said is correct, and what I've heard in my conversations with the different affordable housing property managers that I've been dealing with is, they do have a certain amount of budget available for, annual maintenance and replacement as, issues come up with specific in-unit equipment, for instance. But those larger capital budgets for, a comprehensive project are, none of them have that ready to go for any of these projects. They're very highly dependent on outside funding sources, financing. A lot of them were looking toward the HERA program as a way to be able to do some of these projects at a larger scale. And with that funding frozen at the federal level, the opportunity that we have is to really release funding to help them be able to act on those projects that they want to do, but don't have that upfront capital ready to go to be able to do them at this comprehensive level. So I think the trade-off here is, if we were to scale back the amount of funding that we're putting toward this program, then we'll see, fewer projects be able to participate because they don't have the ability to add in that extra capital. And we may see only, the centralized equipment get electrified and not necessarily the in-unit measures, because that's a much larger and more expensive type of project.
And if I could just add another
Yes.
comment, as someone on the city side who manages this type of equipment. If you asked me, I would tell you, we have a lot of equipment that's at the end of its life and should be replaced. In practice, does that mean we've saved up and we go immediately do that across the board? No. I think like Rachel was describing, we have annual funding, and for the most part, unfortunately, we end up replacing things as they fit.
And so that's what's going to happen here. You'll have a situation where they're sort of accumulating capital over the next few years, may miss out on funding opportunities, may just go with gas at the end of the day.
Gotcha. Okay, I get that. I'm gonna ask an impossible question, but if you happen to have an answer, any sense, so HERA is frozen now, any legislative political update outlook, sense of when and if that was be unfrozen and or available? Impossible question.
My understanding is, the state was expecting this massive influx of funding. There's a certain amount that was already released. Most of that has already been claimed through the single family HERA program. So at this point in time, there is some funding flowing, but only to projects that were pre-approved in the single family program. So the California Tech program that is managing HERA has said will provide more information about HERA multifamily soon. My pulse is that there is not going to be any money for multifamily HERA. If there is, they will probably limit it to disadvantaged communities under Cal Enviro's screen, which would completely eliminate Palo Alto. But there is, plans for some additional California Tech funding in multifamily, although that's not going to be nearly to the scale that we would have seen out of HERA.
Okay, got it. So it sounds like we should, I think as you kind of have, or is implicit in your slides, is just assume we're not going to get any. If we do, I think we'll find ways to use it. So, okay, thank you, George.
Thank you, and thanks to both Councilmember Byrd and Vinker and Vice Mayor Vinker for asking some of my questions, especially on the grid mod and kind of provider willingness side. I guess one just thing to check about the funding stack. I know that in some cases, or maybe in all cases, refurbishing affordable housing is also eligible for federal and state tax credits. Has that been a part of the conversation, or is that a potential useful part of the funding stack that we could condition off of or request that people also apply for and things like that?
Rachel, do you have any thoughts on that? Because this is a potential additional area that we might want to look at.
You talking about CDBG funds in particular?
So
Possibly.
CDBG and any other program that's out there for rehabilitation of housing, because I know from looking at some of the assessments that remediating code conditions or things like that is listed as something in some of these projects, whether that means, bringing something up to code based on, code having changed since they installed it in the first place, or whether it's a rehabilitation issue. It's hard to tell from those quotes, but if something were eligible for one of these rehabilitation programs and it wasn't just screened for disadvantaged communities, would we want them to take advantage of that as well and look for those programs for them?
I mean, my immediate response is, of course, I'd want them to leverage whatever funding is available. We've been talking with our housing planner who works closely with the affordable housing providers as well about, other ways that he's engaging with these properties, and CDBG did come up, as a potential opportunity. I have heard from the providers that a lot of the time that that money is in the form of a loan, it is often a forgivable loan. So at the end of a 20-year period of time, that loan is forgiven, but it does provide challenges on the books for them because they're taking on financing. So, I think there are ways that we can continue to have conversations with affordable housing providers about those opportunities alongside this program. And, we can even make it a requirement that they work closely with our planning division as well as part of this.
Rachel, do you want to also just share the updated percentages on eligibility that you were sharing with me earlier?
Oh yeah, sorry. I misspoke when I said that the for the properties to qualify under LIWIP, I think I said 50% AMI. It's 80% AMI. So 66% of the units in a property need to be at that 80% AMI or lower, and there needs to be documentation of that. So LIWIP does require that, and we would be requiring the same in our eligibility in order to approve the funding for any of these properties.
Thank you. And so just some thoughts. I think the general direction of this program makes sense. I think the hard part for me is the carbon accounting and the relative contribution to 80 by 30, and the opportunity cost, which is, I think, in significant part just for me being new. I think we do want to be focused on 80 by 30. I think it's okay to be somewhat less like ROI efficient for affordable units and for multifamily units, since those are areas that we just need to both like independently and together learn more about. I would support asking for some form of contribution. To Vice Mayor Vinker's point, there are some capital or some reserves. To Rachel's point, there could be some like other funding or grants that the providers could also search for. I don't know what a right number is for requiring a provider contribution, but something that isn't so discouraging, something that maybe we could mitigate with a loan, but yeah, something that captures a little bit of the grant funding and money that would already be allocated. I think it sounds like this is really in the pilot stages, that we don't totally know the emissions reductions per individual project, and that is something that potentially will be sized when they actually go through the state process, right?
We actually do have estimates on all of the projects that we've surveyed. Anything that we haven't surveyed, we don't know, but it's between 800 and 1,000 metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions reduction per year, which is on the same scale as the entire 1,000 unit advanced heat pump water heater pilot program that we launched a few years back.
Okay. 800 to 1,000 tons per year.
Right.
And actually, what was the cost of you said heat pump water heater program?
Oh, that was about $7 million total. And it did include about 1.2 million in expected payments from the participants.
Okay. Okay, so that's actually pretty reasonable then, in the sense that it's order of magnitude, similar
It's kind of
cost and
similar.
similar
Yeah.
Greenhouse gas reductions. Yeah, I think potentially some form of provider contribution then makes sense, but I'm also pretty comfortable with allocating a significant amount of money then, if we know that the ROI is kind of as good as kind of our flagship program.
Thank you. I will follow up to that, Meg. Yeah, so I forgot to ask a question that actually relates to what you just said. So I was on slide 8 where you have the different program alternatives. And the 1, 2, 3, 4th line, which is the one with the required provider contribution. And you have the 4.7 million. How did you calculate that? Like, what did you?
This is a
It's
little
hard.
bit of finger in the wind, frankly.
Yeah.
It's not, so we had our, so realistically, to figure this out, we're gonna have to go and do either some kind of an engineering estimate or get a quote on a gas system. And that's gonna cost money, but less money than it would not to have a provider contribution. So what we did in this case was we had Wildan, our consultant, take a look at one of the sites they surveyed and give us a rough estimate of the percentage that they thought a gas equivalent unit would be for the water heating and the space heating, and it was 20 to 40%. And we just applied that across the board and saw how it came out. It was a little bit more sophisticated than that. We did it on a project by project basis, but yeah, there's a good chance that it's two things. First off, it doesn't necessarily represent what the provider can afford,
Right.
what capital they have. And it's very uncertain.
Yeah. Oh, because I looked at that and thought, my word, how would one calculate that? So
Yeah.
that's, yeah, I can appreciate it'd be difficult, but part of why I asked is what I was also wondering if the city were to offer, say, you only pay half of what you would otherwise have to pay if you didn't upgrade, so it need not necessarily be an all or nothing. If we could somehow ballpark what their cost would be in the normal course if they didn't electrify, just a replacement, and say, well, to incentivize them not to delay, to say something like, if you do it now, you only have to pay half of what you would
Yeah.
otherwise have to when it fails. So just a thought, but I'll turn back to Councilmember Burt, and then before I share my other comments.
Sorry if I missed it, but did we also project the operating costs impacts from this conversion?
The sites we studied, yes.
And what kind of savings, like with the heat pump water heaters, that was a big part of the justification, is lower operating costs. And so if we're looking for these nonprofit providers to have a minority share of the contribution here, maybe aligned with their normal replacement costs, but they're getting a lower operating cost, and that's a much stronger case.
Yeah, I agree. And that points you toward something like the on-bill financing program that I was talking about. So it's almost like you're channeling the heat pump water heater program, and that there's some kind of a limited upfront contribution and some form of repayment. We had that on-bill financing repayment program. And we'd have to talk to the utilities team about what the practicalities of all that would be, because the terms, the duration of the loans that I think would be likely needed to make a match up with the operational costs would probably be a lot longer than I think we'd be comfortable with in a pilot program, but something, might be viable.
Well, it seems that there would be two possible approaches. One would be the on-bill finance, and the other is simply to be able to present to these nonprofits a stronger justification for them contributing a share that would perhaps be aligned with what would be their normal gas replacement costs, or some fraction of that.
Thanks for clarifying. Yeah, I think, you weren't framing it as something that we would take advantage to repay financing, but really as a justification for.
Well, it could be either, but yeah.
Okay.
And so how much savings do we have those estimates on how much savings they'll receive?
Not at our fingertips. I mean, we have the savings in the individual site analyses,
Okay.
but I don't know that we have an aggregate number for you today.
Okay, because
Rachel, do you have anything you want?
I mean, my response to that would be like to really zero in on the savings, we're gonna need to get a contractor quote for the actual products that they would recommend and then be able to do some calculations from there. I mean, we're gonna need an engineering level analysis for that.
Okay, and we had one pilot project that we did several years ago, correct? Do we have any data from that on the savings?
We do have some, and there were savings. They were savings directly to residents in that case because they were in unit
I
measures.
see.
So
Well, those were all in unit. Thank
they
you.
were all in unit.
Okay. And then lastly, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just want to say one thing I will add is if we are replacing the heating systems with heat pump, one caveat is that, we could be adding some additional load for air conditioning that those units never had previously, but that is, adding a really important resiliency component to those units as well.
Right. Okay. And then as far as how different ways to fill that gap and perhaps the affordable housing provider share, it seems that we've had strong philanthropic support for affordable housing and whether it's the transitional housing from Sobrato Corp and the Perry Foundation and others, and more broadly regionally. This hits two buckets. It's serving affordable housing residents on their health and at the same and actually quality of life. They're better appliances at the same time that it's hitting these environmental values, and that we are doing a cutting edge program here, at least in this pilot. I really wonder whether the organizations like Silicon Valley Community Foundation or Sobrato or others might be interested in participating in this. And so the question is, how would we go about engaging with them, or perhaps it's through a major partner like Alta that takes a lead role in trying to see whether there would be real interest in that among some of the philanthropies.
So I have to admit to being not having engaged on that myself and being a little unsure how the city as an organization engages in it. I do know organizations have, in other places have people dedicated to managing those sorts of partnerships, those friends relationships, but I'd have to do some research myself. I don't know if anybody else on the team has a perspective on that they can share.
I think maybe we just sit down with Alta and see what their thoughts are. And
Okay.
Yeah, I do think, I'm not aware of an established process we have to regularly do this. A lot of the instances where we get philanthropy tend to be through friends groups who take on a project and then do that outreach, or people who just come forward on their own. Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. I think this is actually a really challenging question for a lot of folks working in climate. But we have seen that kind of friends of the library model, where you're able to bring in foundation money for other social benefits. So I think it's a big question for us to be considering as we look at what we do to pull in more money for the SCAP in a broader context. But for this specific project, I do agree. Some conversations with Alta and the other providers is probably where we could go with.
All right, thank you. Yeah, it's interesting on this question of sort of life of appliance cost, and the lower power usage being better. It's also tricky in multifamily because if it's the tenant that pays the bill, if you're trying to do on-bill financing, but it's the property manager that's putting the central unit in, it gets complicated.
Can I say something on
Yes,
that?
please.
So what's interesting here, because that is commonly an issue, especially in the commercial space, but here, what's interesting is the bill for the in-unit measures is paid for, well, and I think that's what you're saying, is that the bill for the in-unit measures is paid for by the resident, and then the cost of installing the in-unit measures comes from the the provider themselves.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, so that's something we're gonna be dealing with in all kinds of different
Contexts,
venues, non-residential and residential, and another opportunity for figuring out how to deal with that in this context, although with the additional, bill impacts that it reduces the bill savings for, for low income residents. So that's a trade-off if we're trying to figure that out.
Right, we still have the qualitative, good that is lack of appliance benefit, but just the on-bill financing has those added complexities. But to the point you just made, I think, looking at this project as, an opportunity to learn like our other pilots have, a lot of these issues that we're all raising, we'll be smarter about once we've done something. And I also agree with your point that even just helping catalyze the transformation of the market with additional appliances that are smaller and lower demand on in terms of power and all of that is a good. So I concur with the recommendation that we should do a project. But I'm hearing some interest in exploring a provider contribution that isn't going to cause them to delay. And where that sweet spot is the hard part. So is there a way we can do a recommendation to council that's along the lines of what you say, but sorry, I'm trying to get to the recommendation. Here we go. With an understanding that we would try to work in sort of a non-deterrent. We would talk to the providers, see if there's some level at which this is still a benefit to have a program. So they would still be incentivized to do this, but it's not zero.
Yeah, so the idea would be, instead of setting it up so that we're either covering 100% of the non-grant cost, or we're asking the provider to cover 100% of the like for like replacement cost, we try to come up with something in between so that we're not covering the full cost, but we're providing that incentive for them to move forward with the project now rather than
Delay.
slow walk potentially individual replacements as the equipment fails.
Yeah, I would be interested in that if we could do that. So that's where I'd like to see this go, but so I guess the question is, in the staff recommendation that you have authorized staff to use up to 6.6 million in the gas cap and trade. So that might vary a little. We don't know exactly how much, because in that chart, I think even the 4.7 million you said was a little bit of a finger in the wind. So if we have the language as up to, with the understanding that you would explore sort of sharing that cost of the capital cost of a central unit upgrade, I'd be comfortable with that. I don't know if I need to say that in here somewhere. I think it's probably clear. Anyway, I would move the staff recommendation with the amendment that we would look at a cost sharing on central units. I think that's all I need to say. So I don't know if that's a.
Can I ask for clarification just on the central units for the cost sharing?
No, I think you're right. Just say provider contribution. Let me just leave it at that. I don't know if that's something that either of my colleagues are interested in seconding.
Agree. Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion on this item? No? Okay, I think we're ready to take a vote. We call the roll.
Vice Mayor Binker,
Yes?
Councilmember Wu,
Yes.
Councilmember Burt,
Yes.
motion carries.
Great. Thank you all. I think we got to a good place, and thank you, Rachel, for beaming in. Very helpful. All right. Move to action item 2. Recommendation to council to approve a professional services contract with Franklin Energy to administer a full service whole home electrification program pending final negotiations. So
And for this one, we'll turn to Senior Resource Planner Christine Tam.
Thank you.
Welcome, Ms. Tam. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can I have the slide, please? Thank you. Okay, so now moving into single family. Just to put this in context, for the building sector, we are trying to reach a goal of reducing emissions from the building sector by 60% below 1990 levels. And buildings overall accounts for 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions in the community. Single family homes in particular accounts for the most cost-effective and significant emissions reductions in the building sector because it's been done, we know how to do it, the technology is mature. And we've already been, doing the advanced heat pump water heater pilot for the last 2 years. For this program, this whole home electrification program, this has been on the 2023-2025 SCAP work plan. In particular, there are 2 items in the SCAP work plan that calls out on specific actions for single family homes. One is a pilot program for the modernized neighborhood, and one is to provide rebates to cover all gas appliances in single family homes. So staff has been kind of trying to put together a plan to implement these 2 particular items in the work plan. And the proposal will also align with the regional air quality district zero NOx emission rules that will require that water heaters starting in 2027 must be zero emissions. And then similarly for space heaters, zero emissions requirements are starting in 2029. Next slide, please. So at the SCAP whole home working group last fall, the working group debated the merits of a whole home electrification pilot open to only select neighborhoods versus the citywide rollout. And at the time, for equity reasons, the working group has recommended a citywide rollout. So at that time, staff also recommended a 2-phase rollout to provide whole home electrification services to Palo Alto residents. Phase 1 will cover rebates, also technical support, and also financial assistance through the existing Go Green financing to homeowners. This phase was already launched in January this year, and we're now looking at phase 2, which will provide turnkey services for home electrification projects to single-family homeowners using pre-screened contractors and also pre-negotiated contracts pricing. And for this phase 2, we are currently talking to Franklin Energy, which is a third-party vendor, and they're currently in contract with Peninsula Clean Energy and Silicon Valley Clean Energy. We'll get into sort of the details of this Franklin proposal in a little bit. Next slide, please. So in this slide, I wanted to kind of walk through the time lapse of the evolution of the residential electrification program services. If you can just click it.
There's an animation. Oh, this is the PDF.
Yeah, I can get it.
Oh.
No, it's okay. Let's,
Oh.
That's okay. That's okay. I can just talk through it. So we started the animation started in March of 2023 when the city launched the advanced heat pump water heater pilot offering full service heat pump water heater programs to city residents. At the time, we also offer the home electrification assessment through Clear results that allows homeowners to get some technical assistance to figure out whether the panel can support a heat pump water heater or other types of electrification projects. And we do realize that with the full service program, there is a lag from the time a customer signs up for the program to when the heat pump water heater actually gets installed. So and,
Oh, thank you.
oh, thank you. Okay. Okay, so in September of 2024, if you click, we have added the emergency replacement water heater program. Oh, we can click. There we go. So that was added as a new program in September of 2024. And if you click again, phase one of the whole home program was launched in January 2025. And if you click again, as part of phase one, sorry, you have to click again. There are three components in phase one. We have launched a rebate hub with a contractor directory that expanded the rebates from just heat pump water heater to also include heat pump HVAC and also other add-on rebates, such as a gas meter disconnection incentive. We also have partnered with Quick Carbon to provide online home electrification assessment. So for anyone who's thinking about embarking on a home electrification journey, they can get some online assistance to basically create a journey for themselves, a roadmap on how to get there. And then also we offer phone consultation to anyone who wants to talk to somebody and give them some more additional hand holding. So that's part of phase one, which is now currently in place. And what we're proposing is that we will launch phase two, which is the full service program. And our plan is to have that available, have the contract in place this spring, get into the whole startup mode, get all the program documentation in place, have all the backend business system in place, and be able to launch the service come January of 2026. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, all right, now we're done with the animation piece. So just a quick update on the phase one results so far. So the program was launched in January of 2025, that's just 2 months ago. And we did a full citywide launch in mid-February, right before Valentine's Day. And to date, actually, these numbers are a little bit dated. As of yesterday, we have 29 rebate reservations completed in the rebate hub, with 13 heat pump water heater rebates and 16 heat pump HVAC rebates. So that's all just within a period of just 2 months. And we have already completed the rebate approval for 4 of the heat pump water heater applications. Thank you. So let's dive into the details of this proposed contract with Franklin. So Franklin has already been selected by Peninsula Clean Energy and Silicon Valley Clean Energy through an RFP process that was issued in late 2023. The Franklin contract and SBCE contract was passed by the board in 2024. And through this contract, Franklin will cover customer intake, they do home assessments, they provide project quotes and follow up with the customer. And they also manage multiple subcontractors to implement the projects. And any other, post-installation quality control and support that will also be covered by Franklin. Franklin currently has 3 subcontractors who are highly regarded that will be doing the installations, and they are planning to add more subcontractors to the program. As part of this program, customers interested, they will receive a rebate, and this rebate will be passed on by Franklin on the invoice, so the customers' upfront costs will be lower than going to use a contractor of their own. And on Palo Alto side, we will be handling the community outreach and program marketing to generate program leads. Next slide, please. Okay, so for this Franklin contract, we are proposing a 3-year contract with a total not to exceed amount of $7 million. But what we're asking here is the budget approval for just the first year budget. In the contract, the budget first year is $1.78 million. But because some of that money has already been approved through the advanced heat pump water heater program, we really only need to get the budget approval for $1.44 million of that $1.78 million amount. And then also, I wanted to point out that in the first year, we have about $200,000 set aside for the program setup. And then on an ongoing basis, about $370,000 is for the program concierge that covers the program management and customer handholding, and then site assessment that makes up another $120,000. The bulk of that amount actually covers the rebates that will be passed on directly to the customers. We're expecting each year we will cover about 150 single-family homes, of which some of those homes will be doing heat pump water heater projects, and some of them will be doing heat pump HVAC projects.
Can I just call out a few? So there are a few dynamics I think it's just worth paying attention to here. Essentially, the reason this contract ends up being as large as it is because you have to, in order to pay directly through the contractor, you have to wrap all of the rebates that you are going to pay to the residents into the contract itself. So this 1.2 million per year, you know, if not all residents go through this full service program, we don't expect they will. There'll be plenty who choose the rebate option. We may not end up spending that full amount. We also may not end up spending the full amount for the site assessments. So you can think of it as a $370,000 per year program operation cost and the $200,000 setup, and then a lot of capacity that's set aside to be able to pay rebates directly through the contractor, and then the $500,000 per year of optional low income programs that we're not activating unless we need it as a backup.
Yeah, just a word on the low income optional program scope. So we do currently have a low income program in place through our contract with Synergy, but that contract is going to expire in September this year. So if we don't extend our contract with Synergy, this will be a backup to continue providing efficiency and electrification services to the low income households.
Yeah, or even if we do, it's a potential backup as well.
Yeah. Next slide, please. So this slide shows a breakdown of the rebates that's covered in the Franklin contract. And as Jonathan mentioned, this rebate is going to be passed on directly to the customers, but we're paying Franklin, and that's that money, that rebate money is wrapped up as part of this contract amount. And you can see the budgeted number of projects each year under heat pump HVAC, heat pump water heaters, there's some insulation, efficiency, retrofits, panel upgrades, electrical readiness to cover the circuits, and then also gas meter disconnection. So all the rebate amounts in this slide currently reflects what we are currently offering in terms of rebates in phase one. Oh, and then there's also a line item here for permit fee rebates. That is a placeholder that we're putting in place to reflect the discussion item that was presented at the finance committee meeting.
Next slide. I think next slide's yours.
So this slide shows kind of a comparison, a project comparison for a like-for-like gas furnace versus a heat pump HVAC. In the Franklin contract, we have pre-negotiated measure costs for different types of heat pump projects. And for a 4-ton ducted system for a heat pump HVAC, the project cost would be $17,500, which is a very favorable pricing under the contract. If we include the current rebate of $2,500 and then an additional federal tax credit of up to $2,000, the customer out-of-pocket cost comes down to about $13,000. And by comparison, if a customer have a gas furnace and needs to do a like for like switch out, that would cost at least $9,000. If the customer wants to add additional AC for the house, that would add another $7,500. So this just shows that, for the customer out of pocket, they would definitely, it's more favorable to the customer to go for this turnkey system, this turnkey program to switch out their gas furnace with a heat pump HVAC, system.
Next slide. All right, I'll finish this up, and this sort of repeats some of what we talked about in item one. So in terms of the three-part SCAP strategy we talked about in item one, this program also fits into that second part of the strategy, the early adopter advanced pilots. Essentially, we're expanding our single-family advanced pilot to include HVAC. And this will help us learn about people's decision-making process for HVAC and for gas disconnection projects. So going beyond water heaters, that'll help the air district. It'll help transform the market and build that critical mass for heat pump space heating in addition to water heating. Next slide, please. And then we're funding this program from gas cap and trade as well. We highlighted those trade-offs here. The budget for this program is a lot smaller than the affordable housing program, so the trade-offs are smaller as well. Again, next slide, please. We did want to offer, we did try to keep this program really financially efficient. The program capacity assumes kind of a similar participation to rate to what we're seeing in the water heater program. So about 20% of the annual turnover in these sorts of pieces of equipment. But you have a couple options if you wanted a lower budget. If we wanted to pare this back from 150 homes to 100, that would lower the budget by about 10%. It's only 10% because there are all these startup costs at the end of the day. So there's an economy of scale to having a larger program capacity. We could also just not do this program and just go with a rebate-only program. We've struggled with rebate-only programs, and then the other issue with that is you don't get insights into the people who don't move forward with a rebate program. And it's really helpful, these full-service programs, in surfacing that sort of information. But that would save significantly more money if we wanted to do it that way. And then last slide, there's the staff recommendation. Thank you. Public comment?
Are you done with you?
Yes, we're done with our presentation.
Okay.
Sorry, should have been more explicit.
Okay, all right, well, thank you for that presentation, really helpful. Yeah, I think let's go ahead with any public comment before we do questions and comments from colleagues.
Missing chair.
We have one request for in-person public comment. It's David C.
Okay. David, welcome, and we'll find you a place to sit.
Here, why don't we just pull Christine or Alan, can you slide this up? Oh,
We have a microphone, we just don't have a chair. Now we have a chair. There you go. Thank you.
Thank you for hearing my comments. I think my first question was answered, is how is this different from the whole home electrification pilot program? And what have we learned and how's that been applied? I think Christine answered that. The second one was a comment is that this relies on city outreach. And I think this is, shall we say, not the city's strong point. And this was been brought up through the heat pump water heater program. And I realized, I think there were several attempts to get outside contractors for real marketing on these programs, and wondering if that's going to be, those lessons learned will be applied to this program as well. Maybe it's not large enough, but let's make sure we don't get these lessons learned on marketing by the city, which is, again, not their strong point. Thanks.
Thank you for that public comment. Do we have any additional in the room or on Zoom? I see we have Bruce H.
Yes, we do.
Welcome.
Bruce, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, we can.
Loud and clear.
Great. I have a couple of comments. One comment is, as noted, the air district rule for water heaters comes into effect in 2027. And you noted that this program starts in 2026. Okay, so come 2027, it's no longer going to be voluntary that people replace their gas-fired water heaters with efficient heat pump water heaters, non-NOx devices. And so what does that say about how this program is run? It seems like that you're only offering between 100 to 150 slots per year, and there's going to be a lot more than that that will need to be replacing their water heater during that time. And so it seems to me strange that there would be, 100 people per year that would get this huge payout of $3,500 for their water heater, and everybody else would get nothing. So that's my first comment. And the other comment that I have is I wonder whether it really makes sense to offer a rebate for disconnecting the gas meter. I don't really see a lot of reasons why that should be necessary. It's a sort of a purity thing for some folks, but I just don't really see why that's necessary and why the city should be offering a rebate for that. And so I guess to go back to my original comment, I'm very curious as to how you envision this, working in conjunction with the air district rule. And as you know, I've also been for some time now suggesting, zero interest financing as an approach that could be very helpful starting in 2027 when we have a mandated environment.
All right, thank you. Is that closed public comments?
Yes, it does.
All right, thank you. As I'd say, does the staff first want to respond to any of the public comment?
Yeah, I can address both those questions. Why don't I address the first one about outreach, and Christine, you want to tackle the second one about coordination with the air district regulations. So we actually just wrapped up an RFP or in the process of contract negotiations for an outside marketing consultant or outreach consultant. So that's in progress, and we've been also brainstorming some new approaches. Christine, you want to talk about the coordination with the air district?
Yeah, so the air district rules mandates that any water heater that needs to be replaced must be replaced with a zero NOx appliance. However, we don't necessarily want people to wait until their gas appliances stops working. I think we would still prefer having people replace the gas appliances sooner before they reach the end of life. And I think it's still important to provide that incentive to the customers to make that move early. And in terms of the rebate amounts, the $3,500 for the heat pump water heater, I think staff may revisit that threshold, the level of rebates as time keeps going, depending on what the market uptake looks like and how contractors are. The contractor community, the more contractors there are, the more competition there are, we can revisit that rebate level. I also wanted to address the question about the gas meter disconnection incentive. We don't currently offer a rebate for switching out a gas appliance, a gas cooktop to an induction cooktop, because the cost of induction cooktop very widely. So I think to incentivize homeowners to switch out the last two appliances, namely the gas cooktop and the gas dryer, we wanted to put an incentive for gas meter disconnection, and hopefully that would give enough incentive for homeowners to switch out those last two measures.
I'd also just want to add, so regarding the rebates, and Christine, correct me if I'm wrong, but as we start heading into a mandated environment, it's not just about reconsidering the amount of the rebates, but whether we're even issuing rebates at all. So this full service program may starting in 2027, become one that's focused entirely on HVAC, which regulations don't apply until 2029. And if there were the addition of other programs like 0% financing or other low-income incentives may very well would likely continue in a scenario like that. And if there were other programs to sort of help people transition, having a full service provider may also allow us to be able to provide guidance to people on how to access those programs when the mandates come into effect. So it serves as sort of two roles: continue to get people to do HVAC projects and connect people with the resources that are available for water heaters after the mandates take effect.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Thank you. All right, a lot of thoughts on this one, but let's see. George, do you have questions or comments?
Yeah, I'll just start with a few quick questions. In the staff report and presentation, it was year 1, year 2, year 3. So is year 1 2026, or is it year 1 start at some point in the middle of 2025? Like, what's the time period to get this started?
So what our current plan is to bring this contract to council in April this year, 2025.
Okay.
So year 1 will, in theory, start in April. Of course, we're gonna need some time to get this program launched. So we're anticipating that it will take us anywhere from 6 to 8 months to launch the program. So in terms of the program actually hitting the street, our current goal is January of 2026.
Okay. And I'm totally aligned with the overall framing and goals, like commit to the goal for single family homes, but for HVAC systems, is there any applicability to multifamily homes? And would that be significantly different if an individual unit, a condo or townhome or something, wants to, I don't know, replace their AC and furnace?
So this is a really active point of discussion for us right now, because we just got back our multifamily electrification opportunities study, and it's looking like the costs in many cases are similar for multifamily in-unit upgrades to single family upgrades. So some of the program design dimensions are similar. It's a little different in the sense that a lot of times you're dealing with a landlord as opposed to a property owner, but if in the case of a condo, it's very similar. So, and then on the other hand, with the multifamily, you have these commercial water heaters,
Right.
or sometimes commercial space heaters that you need to treat as if you're dealing with a non-residential customer. And so figuring out how to structure that organizationally and programmatically is something we're working on this year. But yes, we're going to work on it and address those issues. And we're not ruling out the possibility of incorporating them into a single family program.
Okay, yes, at least for the HVAC only.
Right.
And my general thinking there is that single family homeowners are much, much more affluent on average. But I mean, if the costs are the same, I also realize single family homes might have more emissions that we need to offset sooner.
Can I also add one more comment? So because we're piggybacking on this contract that that has already been negotiated in terms of the pricing and the terms has already been negotiated by PCE and SVCE. And in the current language, they're serving primarily single-family homes. So I don't know, I mean, this is something that we need to ask Franklin whether they are able to, their subcontractors can serve multifamily properties. Based on our previous pilot to replace the gas wall furnaces in a multifamily property with heat pump units is a little bit different in terms of the permitting process, the treatment of the condensate, and the electrical wiring is in a multifamily property is definitely more complicated than a single family home. So the pricing in this Franklin contract is, I would say, would only apply to single family homes.
Yeah, so it's one of
Yeah.
many different issues that we need to think through. I mean,
Okay.
you could do it for the rebates, but maybe you couldn't do it for the Franklin contract. There's a lot to juggle.
Okay. Can you talk about the total number of tons of greenhouse gas emissions that you would project for this program? Emissions reductions.
Yeah, so I think our estimate for the 3 year, which is about 450 homes, the lifetime greenhouse gas emissions would be about 4,650 metric tons.
Okay. Over the lifetime.
Over the lifetime of the measure. So like, if you think about a water heater typically lasting 12 years and then an HVAC system usually lasting about 15 to 20 years. So that would be over the lifetime
Okay.
of these equipments.
Okay. So that is noticeably less kind of bang for the buck than the program that we just looked at, which was 800 to 1,000 tons per year for a similar cost. This one would be 4,600 over kind of 10 to 20 years-ish. Okay. That is good context. And can you also talk about when the marketing could kick in and just elaborate a little bit more about that plan?
So we're continuously doing water heater program marketing. And since we've launched a whole home electrification program rebates already, just rebate only, we've started shifting that outreach already to be more inclusive of whole home, not just water heaters. So that's already up and running and we'll be able to incorporate this program.
Okay. And maybe one just last question for my context. How quickly can Franklin come in and actually execute on one of these projects? So for example, if my HVAC system breaks down, is that something they can come fix in a few weeks, something like that? I'm just thinking about that in context of feedback I've heard about the heat pump water heater program.
Yeah, so Franklin is actually not the
Right.
installer, the contractor. They have subcontractors and they currently have 3 subcontractors. They'll be adding additional subcontractors. So actually, I'm pretty confident that Franklin can provide the installation services on a pretty timely basis compared to our current full surface heat pump water heating program where we have 1 contractor.
Okay. Thank you. Those are my questions. I'll save some thoughts for later.
Okay, thanks. So one, I wanted to go to the similar questions last time is what analysis have we done or is available on the operating cost savings with our utility rate structure, which oddly advantageously with compared to PG&E, we have our lower electricity rates. And so do we have those estimates?
So savings are like, you can think of them as likely pretty similar to water heaters. It'll vary very heavily home by home because it's about 50% of your usage. About 40% of usage is of gas usage is from water heaters, 40% from space heating. But it'll vary from place to place, and we're just starting to re-engage on operating cost savings as part of the, or not just starting, but continuing to work on operating cost savings as part of the funding study. So didn't do anything specific to this program, but we are doing more analysis on operating cost savings.
So without knowing that operating cost savings, it's hard to really judge how much subsidy we need to provide versus how much benefit the homeowner will get out of this. For instance, the additional cost for adding AC of $7,500 or, well, whatever comparison we make, I should say that's only one part of it. But how do we determine how much subsidy we should provide without really understanding how much savings the homeowner is going to get over the life of that piece of equipment? And in the case of the space heaters, if along the life, then the heat pump, water heaters.
Yeah, so for HVAC, it is difficult to determine the exact savings. Again, it depends on how much AC they will be using or how much cooling they'll be using in the summer. Again, like, you know, coming back to a previous pilot, the multifamily gas furnace pilot, we were able to determine that if someone switches from a gas furnace to a mini split system, over the course of the year, they will save just a little bit of money, even if they use AC in the summer. But then, of course, if they use a lot of AC in the summer, there won't be any bill savings, operational savings.
Oh, so it's that slight.
Well, that has to do with the assumption that people use their AC.
But that was only, it was slight with using the AC only modestly. And it could be negative if they use it significantly. So if I'm just focusing on only using it modestly, it's only a slight operating cost reduction.
Yeah, so it's a similar gas use reduction to a water heater, but when you factor in the increased AC use, then it ends up netting out. So we've sized these rebates. So first off, because the operating savings are similar to the water heater and the rebates are similarly sized to the water heater, the cost differentials in many cases are similar to the water heater program. We have incentives that are fairly similar to the water heater program and similar to what others in the region are doing as well, to make it simple for contractors. And our sense is that that's going to be right in the right ballpark, but we're going to get some data from this program to decide what we should be doing longer term.
So I'm also kind of struggling with the issue of, okay, we have 150 homes and a lot of subsidy, and then we have on the horizon the Air Board mandates. And so are we envisioning that this program would be a bridge to accelerate that adoption? And then once the Air Board mandates kick in, we still might provide incentives, but not at the same level because they're being mandated. What's the strategic thing?
These are our 2026 through 2027 work plan discussions. This is a strategy discussion that we need to have over the course of this year. What are we going to do once mandates are in place? And there are a lot of different ways you can go at it. You can just cut back on the rebates entirely and provide other sorts of services like financing. But for the purpose of this program, it's two things to gather, or it's a number of things, but with respect to the air district regulations, it's gathering data, creating some momentum in the market so that contractors are ready for when the mandates come into effect, and creating this sort of critical mass of people who've already gone through it as a reference point. And then it also gives us the information that we need about how people choose to move or not move on programs. It gives us that information to help us design the services that are going to be needed under a mandate scenario. I think the other thing that we just need to keep in mind is that the mandates don't get us to 80 by 30 either. That you have to move faster than that to get to 80 by 30.
Well, and then within that context of kind of all those the data gathering and the program, really piloting and understanding how we scale. I'm really glad that we're doing this partnership with not just Franklin, but in doing so with PCE. And I really believe that, you know, we're modest size and leveraging with Silicon Valley Clean Energy and PCE where appropriate is just great. But they've already engaged with Franklin on a very similar program, is that correct?
Yes, in fact, PCE and SVCE, their comparable program with Franklin just launched early this year.
Okay, so then the data gathering and the experience of the program, if they're already doing that and they're ahead of us, what's the additional criticality of us having our own local data gathering and program modeling versus being able to piggyback off of what they're learning and in this particular program ahead of us?
I can chime in. I think a lot of Palo Alto homes are unique because we are a older community. We have some older homes. And you know, we like to understand based on the housing stock in Palo Alto, what some of those challenges might be in terms of electrical conduits or placement of compressors, making sure that it meets the noise ordinance, setback and all that. So I think there's still value in having Palo Alto have our own program and gathering that data to learn what the challenges are.
Okay, so
I'll also add practice. Permit streamlining is something that the water heater program really helped us with. And unless you have those projects coming in, one after the other, you don't build up that experience, that skill throughout the organization. The second thing I'll say is that the PCE and SVCE programs are very small relative to their populations. So you'll have some nice sample sets in there, but it's not going to be, like Christine said, Palo Alto housing, and it's not going to be, the results are not all going to be completely relevant to Palo Alto.
and how many homes per year are they planning?
About the same as us.
Yeah, I'm not so convinced that our housing stock is so unique compared to some of those that
Gotcha.
it's not identical, but I just want to make sure that we're not duplicating efforts and that we're leveraging wherever possible, because we don't have the resources, they don't have it to be the inventor of all new programs. We and they are at the cutting edge here and just want to leverage those resources. And that leveraging, and as it pertains to when we're talking about the marketing, and I just was speaking with some folks from 350.org, and you know, we had a lot of volunteer programs or efforts by them that helped on the heat pump water heater, and they are ready and raring to really help us. And so I want to make sure that grassroots set of resources we're incorporating in that marketing and not thinking that we just too much defer to a marketing company or somebody else to do it in traditional marketing methods. When we report on this to the council and otherwise, the point that you made, and it's in here of that the contractor expenses of Franklin are only 370,000 a year, is that right? Is that, and the rest is passed through. I worry that it's going to be misconstrued and they're going to look at the bigger number and say, oh, you got a contractor who just got awarded a $6 million project. So I would be really clear on what the contractor is and what's embedded in the other parts. Under the slide 11 that talks about making progress, it says communicating the why of climate action. But once again, on that communication and marketing, it's got to be the why of climate action the why of health benefits, the why of actually comfort and quality of life. And we, as a climate action committee and team, we keep thinking about this thing that's vitally important to us. But the question is, what's the argument to the customer that is most compelling? And I think that for many households, when they discover the health aspects, they may find the climate argument strong, but that's what tips them. And I still think we and others underemphasize that.
I just do want to share our role as a public agency and then our unease with making statements about health when it's not within our regulatory purview. And so I think wherever we can find statements from other public agencies or health agencies about those specific benefits that we can point to, that will be really helpful. Because we're not in a position to look at the scientific evidence within the climate action team and determine where the health benefits are or aren't. So looking for third-party validators on that
Thanks for raising that concern. Have we engaged with our county health department on this?
I think we've looked for information put out by the county health department, but haven't engaged with staff directly.
Okay. I would really recommend then that we elevate that, and we can also, the members can talk to our county supervisors about it. I'm glad that kind of percolated there, because if that's what's holding us back in part, let's address it head on, and I suspect that's solvable. Also, when we have, Christine, you mentioned these kind of two lesser appliances of the dryer and the induction cooktop, but we have now, the last 2 years now, 3 different major brands that are providing combination washer dryers that are full size, and heat pump washer dryers that also have very considerable water savings. And so I want to make sure that return is clear to the consumer. I don't think most people are aware of these yet. When I'm enthusiastic about them, and people for the most part just don't know about them. And when we once again couple the environmental benefit, the energy cost benefit, the space benefit, which is really valuable when Palo Alto homes are worth $2,000 a square foot, freeing up 15 square feet has an equivalent value that far exceeds the cost of the appliance. And so just making sure that we are making the case as to why there are a whole bunch of savings from water, from energy, from space, and the health and all that. You put them together and it goes from something that's, well, should I consider that, to, oh my God, I think that's the most beneficial appliance I could perhaps convert to. It really changes the thinking that people have. And we kind of tend to project certain behavioral decisions onto people, but we need to look at it how they're going to look at it. Same thing on things like when we look at the economics of battery storage in homes, and they aren't overwhelming, and yet we're seeing people who are invariably now almost putting in battery storage with home solar because they want that sense of security, and that's not something we're quantifying, and yet that's what's driving most of the decisions. And so we've got to make sure that when we look at how we market it, we're looking at what causes them to act as opposed to what we think should be the basis for their action.
I'll do that. Yeah.
Okay. I do still struggle with the point of whether we are concentrating the benefits too much versus spreading them over a larger number. I appreciate the arguments on the learning curve and how important that is for us. It makes me reflect on, I just want to make sure everybody is aware of what is now a pretty seminal study and book called How Big Things Get Done. And it is changing a lot of thinking on project management of all scales. It was focused initially on mega projects, but it translates into some of the points that you're making. And I really encourage folks to really get that book out there in everybody's hands. I would say, for instance, at VTA, the Mega Projects Manager, gave it to all of his team as a Christmas present. That's how important he thinks it is. And so some of the things on this scaling, making things modular and scaling them, and how that really drives price is one of the central tenets. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Just want to do a time check. We're over our projected stop time. I know some of us wanted to get to another event, and I don't know what staff other commitments are. But what I'd like to do, I'm going to make my comments, see if we can move on this item one way or another, and if not, we could even hold it over if need be. First of all, Pat, completely agree with you on the public health thing. And in fact, I think we can solve for that. And it's funny because I'm so, I think of them as so interrelated that when I see the why of climate action, I just assume that public health is one of the whys. And I would say at the Air District, we were formed in 1955 before people heard of, climate change and action and all of that. And it was an air pollution. In fact, people were our head was APCO, the Air Pollution Control Officer, is the chief executive. And it all rotates around public health. So I can't summon, immediately, but I would bet that also the Air District would have a lot of public health and other facts and data and public statements that you could cite them as the source if you weren't comfortable saying, we believe it, but can cite that that's out there. And we have an awful lot of people in white lab coats come give public comment just about every board meeting. I should say physicians, not just researchers. But I also wanted to comment on the marketing plan. That sounds, I'm glad that's, the marketing contract with the marketing agency coming online. So sounds like we've started already. We're working on finishing that contract. And what I'm wondering is if that will A, accelerate the marketing activity, and B, if there will be a plan sort of put forward to go in parallel with these plans, or whether they will just start implementing right away.
Megan will probably IM me one way or the other on that, but I think just start implementing. Oh, there, Megan's here. Yeah, so you see a nod. So yes, we'll start implementing.
I like the implementation, but it would be interesting to kind of know how the marketing plan might, the planned marketing would jive with these. We have sort of a complex landscape with the 2027 water heater rule, 29 HVAC rules, how that is going to affect all of this, whether it's the rebates, the uptake, the market, all of that. So I assume they're going to have to, they're going to have to, the reach codes, yes, they're going to have to sort of adapt as the landscape changes. I also wanted to ask, when we were talking about the life of appliance costs and the factoring in the air conditioning aspect, I wanted to make clear whether we're talking apples to apples or apples to oranges. So, and what I mean by that is apples to oranges is relevant if we're looking at total cost. In other words, if I didn't used to have air conditioning and now I do, my cost goes up, but I get an additional benefit, I would call that apples to oranges. Something relevant and interesting, but it's not necessarily the apples to apples, which is how we sell the water heaters, because you get hot water either way. So when you were saying that it could be a marginal benefit or perhaps even negative, is that because of the additional benefit of air conditioning, or is it apples to apples?
It's not apples to apples if you don't have air conditioning, and that's the sticky thing we're wrestling with both in this program and in the funding study.
And I would think if we make it clear that it's apples to apples, here's the number, and you can get this benefit if you choose to spend more, have at it, but you're not required to. You don't necessarily not realize the benefit for the same thing you've been paying for. Is that fair?
I'm not sure I'm entirely following. I think what we wrestle with is that if you don't care about air conditioning and you have a furnace and we want you to replace with a heat pump, essentially you're looking at, it could be as much as an $8,000 gap. And if you don't value that value, the additional value you're getting for that $8,000 is air conditioning. If you don't value air conditioning, then it's really just an $8,000 more expensive heater. And that's where trying to choose that $2,500 rebate amount is challenging for people who only have furnaces. For people with air conditioning, it's a much easier equation. So the one thing we'll learn here through this program, we're going to see a lot of variability here, and we're going to find out how many people, have air conditioning when they don't have air conditioning. How do they process this decision? And this is going to be really important as the 2029 mandates come on.
Yes, that'll be interesting to learn all of that. I was going to ask a question I think was largely answered by Councilmember Burt's questions about the Franklin. I was curious about if we sign the contract in April, can the January 2026 launch date be accelerated? Given that, I've been working with PCE and SBCE. I understand now that there may be some additional things we want to do in data analysis here in Palo Alto, but if we could, use theirs, which I understand is also a smaller sample size, may or may not be identically, analogous. But if there were things we could do to accelerate that, I would think that would be beneficial because it would give us the longer period of, well, first of all, it'd be available sooner, but it'd give us a longer time until those rules kicked in. So we had more understanding of how the program operates.
Yes, definitely staff intention to launch the program sooner. If we can get everything in place. I do know that for the PCE and SVCE program, it did take Franklin like close to a year to launch. So maybe they have learned some lessons as part of the program launch of PCE and SVCE, and we can
leverage that.
Come in and just streamline all the processes.
Yeah, okay. So it sounds like you already anticipate it to be somewhat accelerated relative to that, but I think that the more we can do along that, the better.
We would like to avoid launching at the end of November or December because it's just a very busy time for everybody.
And then the number of homes, 150 homes in the proposed contract. Is that what you think the actual uptake is likely to be, or is that giving us headroom, or do we think it might be more? I mean, it's hard to predict, I suppose.
Well, we're assuming that we'll get a similar uptake, around 20% of the turnover as we do in the water heater program. And if we do, that results in about 150.
I see. Okay, and then we'll see how it goes, but with the financial rebates, assistance, et cetera, that we're grappling with and struggling with. And then the question of, well, when the mandates come into place, what impact does or should that have? There's going to be a lot of discussion, obviously on the regional level about that in communities far less able than ours to subsidize that. So I'm hopeful there'll be a lot of sort of movement, and there may be implications for our city that adjust how we think about what we ought to do on the rebate front, what we need to do on the rebate front, what the, overall cost of installing these is. There's state legislation now to, make uniform contractor licensing for heat pump installations and things like that. That may drive the whole cost of installations down in a couple of years. We just don't know yet. Or if not in a couple of years, in 5 years and, further on. So I think we're just gonna have to be pretty nimble and responsive to the environment as we go forward on this program. So with that, looking at your recommendation for a 3-year contract with a not to exceed of basically $7 million. I just want to confirm that includes what I might call a pass through of these rebates. And so it kind of looks bigger than it actually is, consistent with your slide 8 on the proposed budget, where a huge portion of it is the instant rebates. Okay. All right, well, I'm interested in whether my colleagues have more to say or are ready to discuss a motion, and if so, I would invite them.
I'm good.
Don't you have anything else?
No, I think I'm okay right now. More to say in the future about, rebate structure, but that's not really the topic here.
I think we'll be having an
Yeah,
ongoing
I
conversation.
know, yeah, I mean,
Anybody want to make a motion?
Sure, and I just want to make sure that, as the slide said, that, the 3-year, includes options, right? It's not, we're not binding ourselves to the 3-year, right?
Is the optional scope for the low income program, that is included in that $7 million right now? We're not.
But it's talking about your
Our ability to not
3 years.
proceed with
But you
additional.
don't.
Oh, right,
receive.
right. That's a not to exceed amount. We don't have to.
I
All of I'm sorry, Counselor. All of our contracts have language saying that subsequent years are subject to appropriation of funds in the annual budget.
okay, well, because of some of the unknowns we have, I really encourage that we, spell out that, what's the dollar amount we're obligating ourselves to, and what's the amount that are optional extensions of the additional years. Because I just, I don't want to hold back, but I'm concerned that we may not view this as what we want to do in year 2 or 3, exactly this way.
What is it, slide 8 in your presentation tries to spell that out. There's a
Yeah.
whole line that says, all this is optional.
And that's what I was referring to, and that's why I wanted to make sure that when this goes to the council, the summary language of staff recommendation captures what was in slide 8.
Got it. Thank you.
Period in the report.
Got it. Okay, so on that note, I'll recommend the staff recommendations with that change.
second.
Thank you,
Yeah, second.
Councilmember Lee, for seconding that. You have anything further you'd like to say? No. No, I would just say that, we're scrutinizing this as we should, and we'll, have to figure out, that's why I was also looking at slide 8 and the costs, and that should go to council. But that said, this is exciting. And I think that's the part we don't want to lose in this, that we are, just like we were ahead of the curve on the heat pump water heater program. The fact that we're doing this in this fulsome way, I think is really, really good for the community, good for climate. And it's a big undertaking. So, thank you for delving into it in a really thoughtful way. But I'm excited at what we can do to support our community in pursuing climate action and public health. So I support this motion. I don't think there's any further discussion. So would you call the roll?
Councilmember Wu,
Yes.
Councilmember Burt,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Vinker,
Yes,
motion carries.
excellent. All right, well done. So next item is future meetings and agendas, and as Director Eggleston said earlier, we are meeting in 2 weeks, April 4th and at 1:30 p.m. That agenda was just published yesterday as well. And I look forward to seeing everyone there. Absent anything else, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right.
Thank you.